Hi everyone. Today we are going to do something very, very different. If you've been following this channel recently, you would know that this is a theme as of late. A couple of weeks ago, I introduced a new mini-series for this channel called Movie Macro, where me and perhaps a friend of mine, maybe sometimes by myself too, are going to go and either watch classic movies or movies that are playing into theaters right now and just do 30-40 minute discussions, reviews, whatever. And today we're also doing something different, right? We're playing a video game that came out very recently called Stray. I had this on pre-order on Steam, so I got a little bit of a discount. My brother is the one that told me that it's coming out, and the reason why I was attracted to it is because I am a cat freak. I know all the various cat colonies in my neighborhood. I go and I feed them. One of my cats actually I picked up from the street in a nearby cat colony a couple blocks away. I got to know her son. I got to know all the other local cat freaks, right? I can, over the top of my head, name 5 or 6 of them. So I'm really into cats. Right, I think this is a fun sort of thing. I do find the art direction here to be very, very pretty, right, and worthwhile to just sort of look at and see what it's done. Maybe think about how the various art forms might look in the future, right? I do think that in the future, art will become more and more gamified. I recently was reading The Glass Bead Game by Herman Hesse. And there's like a very sort of like a complex environment where they have also like a very, very complex game. It's taking place centuries, past the present. And in this sort of distant future land, the sort of origin story of this art form is a bunch of students, right, that are speaking, dead languages or whatever, or studying other obscure things. They start speaking to one another in these languages. It turns into songs. They start memorizing poems. They start introducing music, other art forms, other, domains of knowledge, until eventually you have like a very complicated game, which, by the way, isn't even fully explained in the text, right? But I can totally see something like that happening in the future, right? So I want to keep a little bit of an open mind. But you also know that, if you've been following this channel, I wouldn't just arbitrarily play a video game and post it up, right? It would be kind of weird. That's not really what I do. I'm not really much of a gamer. But I used to be a gamer, right? And because I used to be a gamer, I do have an insight into video game addiction. I was addicted as an adolescent very heavily to video games. And I think the story of how that happened and how I came out of it might be very useful to people. And the origin of this video in particular is I came across this tweet recently that went viral that I thought was both kind of funny and sad. And it goes like this. You've just ordered Pizza Hut. You've got a new copy of WWF No Mercy for the Nintendo 64 and a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper. No school tomorrow. Your parents don't care if you stay up all night long. A perfect summer night. You are 39 years old. The year's 2022. And the reason why it's kind of sad is, I know for a fact that there is somebody out there who fits this description, right? There is a 39-year-old that played on their N64, would know exactly the game that they're talking about, would know, the concept of like ordering Pepsi or whatever, and just staying up all night playing games. And also be in the position where, as a 39-year-old, they're still kind of stuck in that rut, right? Not many, many people don't get over their addictions. And if you find yourself either in that situation, or let's say that you're younger, right? I'm trying to be a sort of cognizant of the fact that there's probably going to be kids watching this because, this is obviously about gaming, right? It's a game. It is summer vacation. I used to be a teacher, so I have certain sympathies for kids. And I'm going to try not to use any sort of dirty language or get up to the kind of typical antics that I get on this channel. But if you are interested in those antics, click on literally any other video on this channel and you'll get your fixing of that. But speaking of the channel, so if you do have these issues in your life, right? Let's say you're still in this kind of rut. Or let's say that you're a kid, you're 15 years old, and you're addicted, right? And you don't really see a way out. You don't really find yourself doing well in school, right? Maybe You know, you're watching the clock now, you're looking at the calendar, and you're like, oh my God, it's already late July. You know, soon it's going to be August, and soon I'm going to have to go back to school. And maybe you're really not looking forward to that because you know you're not going to pay attention. You know that your mind is always elsewhere. And I'm saying that because this is exactly how I used to feel. And I hope that if you do get something useful out of this video by the time that it's done, you click around to the other things on this channel. Because I think the story of how I came to be addicted to video games as an adolescent and how I came out of that would be useful. But also the clues as to how I got out of it, got past it, is in exactly what you would find on this channel, right? I really sort of make a point to discuss things that people typically don't want to discuss, right? You don't normally find podcasts like my podcast, the Artifact podcast. It's audio as well as video, right? You could find uploads here and elsewhere. You don't find many people doing like 3, 4, 5 hour discussions on books, right? Because you know it's just hard, right? And this kind of has a relationship with addiction because the whole idea behind addiction is you're essentially short-circuiting your pleasure circuits, your dopamine receptors, things that are supposed to be taken as treats that you could enjoy in shameless fashion. They're no longer something that you enjoy in shameless fashion because all you know is the self-indulgence. All you know is that treat. And your entire life becomes structured around getting more and more of it. But there's other ways of getting those dopamine rushes, right? And ever since I got over, you know, as an adolescent, or rather in my late teenage years, since I got over my various addictions, I was also addicted, by the way, to food, right? I used to be morbidly obese. Just like video games were a comfort, food was a comfort. And when you get over that and you find other things that are meaningful in your life, you realize that there are other sources of pleasure, right? And they're much stronger than even like the best video game ever, right? Imagine the thing that you're most addicted to. What I want to tell you is there are things that will give you infinitely more pleasure than that. I've experienced it, and when I give you my backstory and how I, you know, went through this and where I am now in life, I will talk about some of these experiences, and I will talk about how they compare to the sort of like easy dopamine rushes from video games. But I don't want to start too heavy just yet, right? The reason why I'm having this discussion while playing a game is, you know, I want to put you in an environment where you do feel at ease, where you do feel comfortable, right? You're still a little bit in your comfort zone. This is something that you know. I'm not shaming you. I'm not putting you down. And I'm showing you that, hey, look, it's possible to do this thing that I'm doing now in a way that is not shameful, right? So let's just sort of like appreciate this for a second, right? Very pretty, right? I do like how this looks. I believe, like Steam says, it's something like 10 gigs on your computer, but really it's something like 6 or 7. So it's just like functionally like a few, like if you download a few movies or whatever, this would be roughly the size. And as I've said, I'm a total cat freak, and I could tell cat freaks made this game because look at this, right? So the cats are interacting with each other, and you know that this is exactly how cats interact, right? These are people that have observed them in the past, and they know to put this sort of thing into the game. So as we talk to the various cats, right? I'm saying talk loosely, right? It's sort of like, and it's interesting, right? Like if you become like a cat parent, the one of the main differences between cats and dogs is dogs they view as a master, right? I've had dogs in the past, but once I got cats, I really started to prefer them. Dogs view you as a master because that's literally what they have been bred, right, from wolves into dogs to be, right, to treat you as a master, to sort of serve you. But cats, right, they are not fully domesticated, right? There's definitely like a domestic cat, but they've retained far more of their wild quality. So the relationship that you would cultivate with a cat will be much closer to the kind of relationship you would cultivate with a human. And in fact, cats, they view you as a parent, right? It's called a pseudo parent, and specifically as a mother, right? Because cat fathers usually are not in the lives of kittens. But cats, they would view you as a mother. You would know, like if you observe cats in the wild as I do, if you've observed them any length of time, you realize that they don't really meow at each other all that much. They snarl, they have other sound effects, right? Let's call them. But they don't necessarily meow at each other. They reserve their meows for human beings because they view human beings as parents. And they also reserve the meows for their own mothers, right? That's another phenomenon that you see, right? It's a very sort of interesting kind of dynamic that people maybe don't really think about, even if they play a game like this. And one thing that I really appreciate about this game is the fact that, if you look at things like Skyrim, right, Elder Scrolls series, or like whatever, it's always just full of just like really high melodrama, right? Like in the Elder Scrolls series, you're always this unnamed prisoner. You don't know why you're in prison. And then you end up like in the situation where you have to like more or less save the world. But in this game, you have like tons of drama and melodrama, but it is very, very realistic, right? If you've been around cat colonies, if you follow them for any number of years, right, you would know year after year, like cats that you know on the street, they get hit by cars, they disappear somewhere, they start developing all kinds of diseases, they start becoming very skinny, right? They start losing their hair, their behaviors change. So one thing that I hate about video games, right, and this is a clue, right, just to get a little bit heavy for a second, is one thing that I strongly dislike about video games is the fact that you are essentially in the situation where you're at the mercy of other people's writing. And very often, because the gamified functions of a game take precedence over the art functions of a game, people don't really care too much about what it's like to to write well. Like I remember like a few years ago, my brother gave me on the Switch Breath of the Wild, right, that Zelda game, and I was immediately turned off how like one of the first pieces of dialogue was, Link, like, come into the light. Oh, you hear that echo? So you can meow in this game and you hear this little echo going on. So in Zelda, right, like one of the first pieces of dialogue is like, Link, come into the light. It's like a total flat cliche that you've heard a million times before. And for that to be literally the start of the game, to me, totally breaks immersion. I know that later on, this game's going to have like pseudo dialogue, which is, it might be a problem. Like I've only sort of like started, right? I don't really know too much how it's going to pan out. But generally speaking, the fact that there isn't this dialogue and the drama sort of speaks for itself, and it tends to be at least a little bit realistic. It has like when I can imagine video games in the future, and especially gamified art in the future, it's probably going to look closer to this than it would be like Skyrim or Witcher 3 or whatever, right? Because even Witcher 3, like, it's sort of like celebrated for it's like great adult mature writing, blah blah, but it's not. It's very, very childlike. If you ever do any kind of reading, if you do any sort of thing, other than play games, you know exactly how flat it really is, right? But I do appreciate this. I'm actually very nervous about like the cat falling, because if this was any other game, I'd be like, oh, I wonder what would happen if I just jump off and die. But here, I don't want to see, being a cat freak, I don't want to see cats die. All right, so you could chain jumps. Let's see, hold space. When you meow, it sort of gets them. It sort of gets them close to you, right? Almost like corralling them in some spot. So anyway, let's start getting a little bit into the heavier stuff by giving you a bit of background about me. Right, I am an artist now. I'm a writer, and I run this channel. I also have a website, automachination.com. I have a Patreon. If you want to support what we do, patreon.com/automachination. You can see it on the screen. And I came to this country when I was 6 years old. Before that, I was born in Belarus. I was actually born in the city of Gomel, and it wasn't far from the Ukrainian city of Pripyat. And Pripyat, if you've played games like Stalker, like Shadow, Chernobyl, or whatever, you would know that there was the Chernobyl meltdown, right? And I was actually subject to this meltdown. I had mutations when I was born. I had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes. I had various health problems. Oh no. Is this going to be like when everything just sort of, when they get separated? Oh man. This is so incredibly sad to watch. So anyway, I was born, right, with those mutations. It was a fairly large city. And even back then, when I was living in Belarus, well, back then it wasn't Belarus, right? It was still part of the USSR. But even when I was living in Belarus, I remember like one of my strongest memories when I was like really sort of drawn to something outside of myself was, I remember like just sitting like by myself at a park bench, and my grandma would bring me a glass of water and a Russian cake called a keks, right? It would basically be a flour cake with raisins, fairly plain, lightly sweetened, and I loved the combination of water and cake. It might sound disgusting to you, but to me the combination was wonderful. And I would sit on the park bench or whatever, and I would have headphones on, and I would have a tape player, and it would be like all sorts of kind of like Russian music. And when I think back to some of the music that I used to listen to, I gotta hand it to myself, I still had some pretty decent taste even back then. A lot of this music is still good, but I was very kind of focused on it, right? I was very moved by it. I would always sort of try to like skip kindergarten. Like whenever I would get to stay with my great grandmother, she let me like stay home and I go to kindergarten. And I would do things like, I remember like chopping down trees. I remember just sort of like, I found this like hedgehog behind some, I don't know what it was, like it was some structure. And ultimately when it ran away, it ran back into that structure. And I remember sort of like poking at it, and as I would poke it, it would like sneeze. And I would always sort of like spend a lot of time listening to music, right? Listening to the words, right? I wasn't even drawn even so much to the music itself. I was drawn to narratives, right? And when I came to the United States, I didn't speak any English at all. And I remember like when I started first grade, they put me in classes. I literally had no English. It wasn't even in ESL class at the time. I came to New York City, but it took me a little bit to get into ESL classes. And as I got there, I had to like figure out like, okay, so how am I gonna learn English, right? And one thing that really helped early on was I was one of the first kids in my block to get a computer. I had a Windows 3.1, right? It was maybe it was the earliest graphical interface for Windows, right? I was also using lots of DOS, right? Or like a lot of commands and other things that you had to do that was like DOS only. I remember like playing games like Dark Sun. And before I knew English, right, having like something like a DOS interface where you have to type out commands and sort of like, it was like an ultimate sort of playground, right? I didn't have like an instruction manual or anything. It's just like I had to sort of figure out what the various commands would do, what they could do, how I would enter certain applications, how I would enter certain games. And that really helped me a lot with learning English. When I would play video games, eventually when I got into, so this is like a cyberpunk sort of like environment, right? So in terms of the realism, obviously it's a game, right? Not everything's going to be realistic, right? You sort of need a little bit of that drama and situations, and perhaps in the future that won't be the case, but it is the case now. So anyway, I would play video games, and I would try to read the instruction manuals on my Super Nintendo so that I would figure out what was happening, right? And I knew that I was getting better at English because there would be games I would have to put down because I didn't know what to do, right? I'd be stuck. And I'd be stuck because I couldn't read a certain kind of like, you know, set of like dialogue instructions, so I didn't know what to do. And little by little, when I would come back and I would know more English and I would retrace my steps, sure enough, like I would get further and further. Movies also are a big part. I remember like watching RoboCop, and I didn't know what was going on, but progressively watching it more and more, I figured it out little by little. Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was another one, right? I learned a lot of English watching movies like that. And it's kind of interesting because I know a lot of kids these days, they're probably very, very sheltered, right? They're not allowed to play by themselves even oftentimes. Like, I mean, back then it would be like little bits of like urban exploration. You'd be out with your friends until, you know, like 9, 10, 11 p.m. even if you were like a little kid. And it wasn't considered crazy, right? Nobody would call the cops on you. Nobody would try to, you know, take you away from your family. So this seems to be like some kind of robot, right? I mean, this is like nicely drawn, right? It's not like resource intensive, right? It's not a sort of like, you know, computer hog, right? It doesn't do anything like that. But despite that fact, it's still very pretty, right? Honestly, the music isn't. I'm guessing this help is referring to like help down there, not like help me, but like if you need help. This music honestly is a little too low key for me. Like I wouldn't use this kind of soundtrack for. Oftentimes I use video game soundtracks still when I'm doing my writing. Doom, you know, the original Doom from the 90s. That's an excellent soundtrack. They take a lot of like Metallica and a lot of Pantera and stuff like that and sort of reformulate it into something new and different. The Command & Conquer series, the first Command & Conquer, the first Red Alert, you know, excellent soundtracks, the perfect like 75 minute sort of way to just get some work done. But I wouldn't use a soundtrack like this for the sake of working, right? It's too low key. But you know, for the sake of a game, right, in terms of establishing a mood, like it you know, I guess roughly speaking, it works. All right, so let's see what's happening. Anyway, so some early games, right? If you're older, you might recognize some of this, right? Obviously, Doom on early Windows, right? That was a huge one, right? Cult classic. I was very into strategy games like WarCraft 2. I remember like when I first tried WarCraft 2, it was only a demo, and then in the credits, they would show you like the various buildings that you could unlock if you buy the full version of the game. But they would put in silhouette. You couldn't see what it was. Like it was like a great way, like especially if you're a kid, they really like played with your imagination. I mean, they knew exactly what. So let me see if I could. I think from what I saw, you could like manipulate, yeah, like one of these objects or whatever. Yeah, so like, you know, back in the day, like I could tell they could really, you know, hook kids by very simple things, like, you know. It wasn't like advanced graphics or anything, but just by putting things in the silhouette, you know, you want to know what it looks like, what it's like, you know, what it does for you. And that played on my imagination. StarCraft was a big one. I was really into, when I was in middle school, into Baldur's Gate 2. And around the time that I was like into games like Baldur's Gate 2 or... Seems to be like an invisible wall, right? You can't, if you want to like kill yourself, you can't, which is all for the better. Again, I would be very upset if I die, because it is a cat. So I would play games like Baldur's Gate 2, and that's when I first started noticing that perhaps I had a problem, because I was in middle school at the time, and I was always doing very, very poorly in school. Right, I almost got left back multiple times. In New York City, the lowest grade that you were allowed to get was something like 55. And I had like straight up 55s in a lot of my classes, science, math especially. And you know, I constantly, like, my parents would be called in. I would have like nonstop conversations with counselors, oh, Alex, why aren't you, why aren't you working? Why aren't you, why aren't you motivated? And honestly, I didn't even have an answer, right? And I think that's kind of the most frustrating thing. Like if you're an addict right now, you might be in that same situation, right? You didn't have an answer. If someone asks you, why don't you do well in school? Don't you know it's good for you? You might not even know what to say, right? It doesn't mean anything to you, right? It's just like something that someone says, right? But it's totally meaningless to you. And I didn't start doing well in school until much later. But before that, I had to like really experience like kind of like the depths of what a video game addiction would be. And the reason why I transpired is because I was moved from Brooklyn, right, which is where I had spent most of my life until that point, to New Jersey, right? So I had went from a huge kind of city to something that was totally like, something that I'm not used to. And my family, only like my grandma was living with me and my brother. So my mom like wasn't there to like drive me places. I had, no car around. Nobody was going to take me anywhere. So I had to do things like, I remember like if I wanted to see friends, I would go to, let me see what this does. Oh, you could scratch by like, yeah, this is psychologically considered very healthy for cats, right? To give them, an opportunity to scratch. So I want to give my cat an opportunity to feel healthy and cat-like in this very difficult situation that he has found himself in. So anyway, I was moved to New Jersey, and I remember like when I wanted to see my friends, like one time, like if you didn't have a car, the only thing you could do was walk, right? Or maybe take a bus, but there were really no buses there. It was like somewhere like South Jersey, like really, really far away. And to see my friends, what I had to do was I had to like walk everywhere. And if you were living in various townships, each school was sort of like divided, to like one township or like multiple townships for one school. And if I wanted to see friends in a different school or a different township, what ended up happening was I would have to walk there. And I remember one time I went to see a football game. And during this football game, because it was so far away, it was like maybe like a 4-hour walk. And by the time that I got home, well, first of all, on the way home, some like creepy old man in this pickup truck, like late at night, it was like no streetlights or anything, just stopped. He was like, "Hey kid, you want to ride?" By the time I got home, like I took off my shoes, my feet were really hurting, and my socks were completely covered in blood. And that was like a common sort of experience for me. So I was in this situation where like the friends around me, like my friends' friends were like in different townships, and I wasn't really friendly with the kids in my school because it was a really like what you would call now like a preppy school. That was not my crowd, right? I was from Brooklyn. These are not people that I had anything in common with. So some of the kind of like grittier townships, that's literally where my friends were. And because I had no way to interact, no way out, and all I had to fall back on was either school, which I didn't want to do, right, or video games, I developed a very serious addiction, right? So this is like when I was like 13, 14 years old. And specifically the game that I was addicted to was a game that was essentially an infinite loop, right? And oh shit. It was an infinite loop called Diablo 2. If you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about. If not, all for the better, I guess. But it's an infinite loop kind of game where you're just grinding essentially to get, better stats, higher levels, better items, and you have different classes to choose from. So you could keep replaying the game, and essentially it never ends. And I remember like I would wake up like on the weekends when I didn't have school. I would wake up literally at like if I were to wake up and it was like 2 or 3 a.m., I would look at the clock and be like, all right, this is too egregious. I can't wake up now. But if it was something like 4:30 a.m. or especially like 5 a.m., I would absolutely be up, and I would be the first one up in the house, even if it was dark out. And I'd be playing this game, and I'd be sitting there from 4 or 5 in the morning until 5, 6, 7, 8 at night, literally not getting up at all, except maybe to use the bathroom, right? I was never one of these people that would, use a bottle, right, to go to the bathroom, which a lot of like gaming addiction, like you see that as a sort of like, cliched example of what someone's going through. But you know, I would essentially not do that. And then, of course, like this didn't give time for homework. I was also doing horribly. I was also almost getting left back in high school at this point. And, you know, I felt like my life sort of like going nowhere. And the only thing that got me out of this rut, you know, a couple things sort of happened all at once, right? One thing that happened was I was already, like I said earlier, I alluded to this. I was into music. Specifically, I was into the words behind music. All right, this is also pretty nice, right? Especially like far away, it's a little, it gets a not so nice, a little bit zoomed in, but I mean, look how sort of, you know, realistic it looks from here. All right, again, for a game that's not a resource hog. So I was into music, and I was into the words behind music, and I was especially into rap because, you know, rap is much more words heavy than, you know, simply just kind of like the sheer volume, right? If you rap, you know, you're talking, so you get to have many more words in a single song, and that has to be the emphasis for lots of artists, right? And I remember it was 2003, it was January 2003. I had just moved for a third time, right? In 2 years, I moved multiple times. This was my third school in 2 years. Oh, shit. Oh, man. So this is my third school oh, damn. This is my third school in 2 years. I constantly had to, like, make friends all over again. And the only thing that was sort of like keeping me sane was like first like my addictions, but also video games. And I remember it was like January 2003, and I was just essentially like listening to this one album, right? It was the first time that I had heard it. It was Nas's Illmatic, right? And I had a special affection for it because, oh man, oh, what, they're eating me? They're eating me? Anyway, let me just finish this a little bit so I can concentrate a little more. Oh, did you see that? They literally made the cat's guts explode. They really know how to pull on your goddamn heartstrings. They know really how to kick you when you're down. So anyway, I was listening to this album, Nas's Illmatic, and I had a special affection for it because he was from Queens. I was from Brooklyn, but Queens and Brooklyn are very similar. And I really wanted to go back to Brooklyn, and here was an album about the city, right? About what I saw, what I was used to. And I noticed right away, I was listening to it on my headphones. It was January 2003. And the words were very different from what I was used to. It was very well written, at least in parts, right? As an adult, I do have a more complicated view of even some of the best rap albums. You could actually read some of these essays. AlexSheremet.com is my first website, and you could find an essay that I did on Nas's Illmatic, right? As a kind of like, you know, both the, you know, history as well as like a kind of like future of rap, what I sort of envision happening. But, you know, like in terms of the writing, it was very different from what I was used to. And I could tell that this was somebody that was actually trying to do something new, do something different. And although I didn't have the vocabulary for this at the time, I did realize that, hey, this could be an objective frame of reference. So like right now, right, as I'm giving you these sort of tools to get over some of these problems, right, we're going to go through this systematically. The first thing I want you to do is just to look around and ask yourself, what is an objective frame of reference for myself? What can I point to that is outside of myself? What can I point to that lets me know about the world outside of my own internals, right? And for me at the time, it was this album and it was rap music more broadly. I was not a reader back then, right? I'm a big reader now, but I was not a reader back then. So I was listening to the album and I realized this is, you know, he's talking about things that I'm not used to. He's talking about things that I haven't really thought about. And he's sort of manipulating words in ways that I haven't really seen all that much, right? And I had already sort of had this idea that I wanted some art in my life. And when I was very young, I was really into drawing, right? And I was also, you know, strangely enough, when I think about it, into writing, because one of the first games that I played when I had this like Windows 3.1 computer was it was like some sort of creative writing game. It was geared towards kids because it had stuff like clip art, right? It had sort of like other like little gamified functions. You could like write a story and do your own drawings or find clip art, and you would have like little cartoon characters that would sort of speak to you and, you know, walk you through all this. And I would spend, like, sometimes I would literally, like, not even play other games. I would spend, like, months at a stretch just, like, booting this thing up and just writing. And I would often, you know, be writing scenarios, like, you know, because I wasn't a reader, right? All that I had in terms of narratives was stuff that I could extract from video games. And so I already had this sort of idea that I want, vaguely speaking, like, art to be in my life somehow, right? And ultimately, listening to this album, like this was like a kind of turning point because it did provide that frame of reference for me, right? And soon after that happened, I got into other rap albums, right? Mos Def, Black on Both Sides. That was a huge one for me. Black on Both Sides, I consider it now maybe the best, you know, rap album ever released. I think a lot of it still holds up very well. The writing, the music, like just like everything, like all around. Mos Def and Talib Kweli also released something called Black Star, and especially like Mos Def, like I was really into because he was explicitly from Brooklyn, had tons of songs about Brooklyn. I was like, damn, like I really want to go back. And sure enough, a few months into 2003, my mom was like, you know what? Is this gonna keep happening? Patreon.com/automachination if you want to support me to watch me play video games very, very badly. If you love all this charisma and such gaming talent. So my mom was like, you know, we're going back to Brooklyn. And I was like, yes, I can't wait. So I spent a lot of time at that point. Just listening to tons of straight Brooklyn rap, because I was like prepping myself to come back, right? Because I was gonna like really have an entrance, right? I would see my old friends again, blah blah blah. And at that time, I had already become more social. And weirdly enough, right? So like, I guess to backtrack a little bit, I was a game that I was totally looking forward to in the depths of my sort of addiction was WarCraft 3, right? So I was really into WarCraft 2 when I was a child, and by the time I was a teenager, I was like, you know, WarCraft 3 is coming out, but my computer at the time, it was too weak. It was too weak to play it, and I was like, damn, like I wish I was able to, you know, have a more powerful computer. I wish I'd be able to, play this game because I was really into, you know, the prequel, and I really wish that I'd be able to do that. And like 6 months later, it just took like a few months for this to happen. Like my dream came true. I was finally able to get a new computer, and I was finally able to play this game. But I noticed even then that although I enjoyed it, it was very, very anticlimactic, right? Because I enjoyed playing it, but at that point, I already had a bit of a social life. I had my first girlfriend already at that time. My first kiss and my first like sexual experiences. So I already had like some other objective frame of references that had nothing to do with like gaming. But I did notice at the time, like, you know what, like I'm not so crazy about this, you know, like I'm enjoying this, but I have other things going on. And a lot of it was music. A lot of it was, I would literally be like every single night falling asleep with headphones on, listening to some of these albums, trying to figure out like what makes this line or this stanza or, you know, this whatever, like what makes it well written, what makes it worthwhile. And by the time that I moved back to Brooklyn, I had like, you know, dozens and dozens of albums. And it was at this point, not just rap, it was multiple genres. And I was like, wow, like there is so much going on here. And I remember listening to, you know, also rappers like A$AP Rock, right? I don't necessarily view him as positively as I used to back in the day. But as a teenager, it was also like, if you're listening to a certain kind of rap, it was also completely novel, completely different, you know, something that you could really, kind of like sink your teeth in it and try to figure out. And so you know, I was sort of feeling like, all right, there are things going on in the world that I can latch on to, and they're gonna help me somehow, because I was feeling like this like addiction to dopamine, this addiction to, you know, all these like kind of like meaningless experiences sort of like going away. But the thing that truly like made me like not even paying attention to video games at all was I remember listening to this one album, Soul on Ice, by this rapper named Razzcazz, and I was really into the rapper at the time. And ultimately what happened was I realized that he knew that, or rather I knew that album was named after this book called Soul on Ice by this the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, Aldrich Cleaver. And I was like, you know, I went to go to the library and see if they have this book. I was lucky enough to be living literally across the street from a library. I just had to cross the street, just literally just cross the street, and it was right there. I came in, they said, okay, we got it. And at that point, I wasn't really a reader. And I remember reading Native Son by Richard Wright in New Jersey. But it took me, like, although I really enjoyed the book and I got things out of it, it took me months to finish it. But when I was reading Soul on Ice, I don't know why it was. Maybe it was because like rap had sort of prepared me for some of these ideas. Maybe something else was going on. But when I read that book, I read it literally in 2 days, which just blew my mind. I was like, how was I able to finish a book in 2 days? That seems unreal to me, that I could just sort of sit back, not be playing games, not be like trying to talk to girls, but literally sitting back in my bedroom. I remember the time, it was October 2003. So like 2003 was like very much a turning point in my life, right? It was October 2003. I was sitting back, I was reading this book. It took me 2 days, and as soon as I finished it, I was like, I'm not gonna go to school for the next week. I'm gonna go back to the library. I picked up like 7-8 books, because I think that was like the limit. The limit was like something like 7 or 8 at the time. I'm gonna get these books, and I'm gonna read them. And it was like books about racism, right? It was books about, and the reason why I was drawn to it is because like when I had heard of like the Black Panthers, like as a kind of like pop cultural phenomenon prior to reading this, I always was under the impression, okay, it was like a black nationalist organization. They're sort of like racist, like the Nation of Islam. But when I read the book, I realized like, actually, wait, like, you know, we're talking about Marxists, right? And isn't it kind of funny that this like totally, you know, like traditional almost Marxist-Leninist organization has been sort of derided as just like an abashedly racist nationalist organization, right? And nationalism and you know, like Marxism don't really have an easy sort of relationship with one another. And I sort of had this idea that the thing that's happening is there must be something going on culturally or in the media or whatever that try to get this thing into my head, right? They brought this idea into my head. They sort of filled me up with this nonsense. And there's a reason why it happened. And now, you know, like in retrospect, I could sort of tell that, you know, one of the things that's happening is, you know, if you're a Marxist versus any other kind of, you know, political persuasion, the idea behind Marxism is, you know, we're all in it together, right? We are workers, right? We have a similar set of problems, and we're not supposed to divide one another according to race, right? Which is kind of like it just fractionates and atomizes people, you know, in almost like infinite degrees. But you have to divide one another according to class, and class is much more robust in the sense that if you have you know, like a class sort of, if you have a sort of a class set of interests, you have a much larger group of people around you, right? Because, you know, black people, white people, Hispanics, Asians, tons of them are working class, right? And Marxism is trying to bring them together. Not that I'm a Marxist now, but, you know, these are some of the things that I was thinking as a kid. I guess that's what you got to do. Because yeah, I didn't see like a function to sort of, you can't interact with any of this here. Anyway, so I originally I immediately understood that, you know, there's something like going on here, and I need to get to the bottom of it. And And very quickly, you know, I started to realize that I don't have to view, right? And this is especially to the people out there that, you know, like I mentioned, you know, having girlfriends. I mentioned having like a, you know, bit of a social life. Not that I had like a great social life or anything, but I had a bit of a social life. And I know many of you out there, if you are like a very avid gamer, perhaps your issue is that you're not, you don't have any social life, and you start thinking like, well, what am I supposed to do? You know, like if I don't have a social life, and, you know, Alex is telling me that this is one of the things that, you know, has helped him, you know, sort of get over some of these addictions. What am I supposed to do? And I think this is key. I realized early on that I didn't want to compete with like my friends, and I didn't want to compete with the people that I was going to in school. I wanted to compete and be like the people in books, right? I wanted to be like the people in books. I wanted them to be my colleagues. I wanted them to be my contemporaries. I had no reason to try to impress the people around me. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to have knowledge in my head. And as I would read some of these books, like words I didn't know, I would write them down. Ideas that I didn't know, I would write them down. You know, names that I didn't know, I'd write them down. And I would try to figure out what exactly was going on. Who were these people? You know, what was all this about? Because I was like, if I'm going to be competing with these groups of people, I have to be on an equal playing field, right? I have to be level with them. And the only way to do that is I have to work. So I wasn't into schoolwork or anything like that. But at the same time, when I started reading, I did start noticing my grades started improving. By the time that I finished high school, I graduated number 4 in my high school. So I went from somebody that in one high school and also in my middle school, I was close to getting left back several times, to someone that was actually doing very well. I was able to get scholarships and go to college for free. I got into the Macaulay Honors College in New York City. So they gave me a free laptop. They gave me like $7,500 to like straight up go like, you know, like go travel, go study abroad. I went to China, I went to Greece. They gave me a dormitory in, of all places, Manhattan, right? Which is like, I was, honestly, I was only there for 2 weeks because I realized like, I don't want to live in a dorm. I like the comforts of home. So I immediately gave it up, right? And then somebody was like very happy to get that dorm for me, but I was like, whatever. But all those things sort of started coming together at the same time when I realized that my contemporaries ought not to be the people immediately around me, right? So if you look at my channel, you see names like Jordan B. Peterson pop up. And perhaps if you're a lonely male, maybe you're very fond of Jordan B. Peterson. And I'm here to tell you that he's sort of, he's leading you down the wrong path. His whole shtick is, well, first of all, right, he's an addict himself. His wife developed cancer, and to cope with it, he was taking pharmaceutical drugs that he developed an addiction to. He, in fact, got so addicted that he had to get a detox after being put in a comatose state in Russia, right? The only place that would do this for him was in Russia. And when he came out of it, he literally sent his daughter, his little girl, to have these podcasts where she would reiterate, no, my father is not addicted. This is not an addiction. And why did he do that? Because he built an entire brand around being not an addict. So, like, listen, maybe saying this is making you feel, you know, a bit defensive. Let's say you're very into Jordan B. Peterson. But I want you to think about it this way. Let's say that you are going through something very tough right now, right? You have a marijuana addiction. You have a video game addiction. You have you have a food addiction, whatever it might be. Here is someone that could have done something for you by admitting his own weaknesses and by saying, I went through this as well. It's nothing to be ashamed about, and you could work through it too. But he didn't say that. He said, I have a brand. It's called a self-help guru. And because I'm a self-help guru, I cannot possibly admit my own deficiencies. And this is a very twisted way to view addiction. It's a very twisted way to try to help anybody at all. So his whole shtick, beyond the fact that he has multiple addictions, not only, right, to pharmaceuticals, right, he had that addiction, but also he clearly has an addiction to fame. He has an addiction to money. He has an addiction to people, you know, sort of giving him this adulation. which means that his entire shtick is my contemporaries and the people that I want to impress are the people around me right now. He wants to impress his fans. He wants to impress his contemporaries. He's not thinking about the future. Whereas what I'm telling you is the only people that you ought to be thinking about as your contemporaries are the people that are yet to be born. People of the future, people from the future, people who are there to basically inherit the things that you do in this life right now. These are your contemporaries. These are the ones that ought to be your contemporaries. So it's very dangerous when people like Jordan B. Peterson recognize that there are vulnerable young males out there. Because one thing that I will agree with him, right, and this is not politically correct to say, but you'll also notice that this is not a politically correct channel if you look at some of the stuff that I talk about. Males, their problems are not being treated very seriously. Everything from the murder rate, oh my God, America has such a high murder rate. We're not talking about women. We're talking about men, right? Men are the ones getting murdered. Men are the ones putting their lives at risk. Men are the ones that are, experiencing suicide at the highest rates, homelessness at the highest rate. These are men, all right? Romantic struggles, right? These are explicitly men. And these romantic struggles are going to get even worse and worse because one thing that's happened in the last decade or so is for the first time, more women are graduating college than men. So what that means is fewer males will be considered eligible bachelors by women, right? When you hear Peterson talk about this kind of thing, it has a very sort of toxic ring to it. When I'm talking about it, I just want you to be cognizant of these facts as you work through these problems, okay? So if you view your contemporaries as people of the future or as people of the past, suddenly friendships are very, very different, right? You start thinking, I don't have to cultivate friendships based on the people in my school, based on the people in my neighborhood. I could start developing these interests, let's say like from reading a book or whatever, and I could go meet people, I don't know, in museums, or maybe there's like book groups, or maybe there's like I started doing that a lot as a kid, right? I was into political activism back then, but the problem with me, although like I'm a very like political person in many ways, the problem with me in terms of like ever become a political activist isn't the fact that I just love staying home too much, right? That's kind of like I've always been a homebody, right? And obviously this sort of allowed me to become very into video games, right? I mean, especially if you're like young and lonely, but I needed to find some of the outlet, right? So for me, it was like eventually books, and it was writing, and it was like being an artist, because when you're an artist, you need tons of time for yourself, right? Now you have every excuse in the world to not go see people, every excuse in the world to sort of, keep to yourself to some degree, right? You still have to, you got to keep your toes in reality, right? Artists that get totally unmoored from the real world, they no longer start, like there are some exceptions, right? But generally speaking, they're not going to be in a position to consistently create great art, right? So this is the way that I would view it, right? So if you are somebody that is a lonely gamer, think about it in terms of, I can forge relationships in the abstract. And that could be just a start, right? That's just a start. You don't have to be physically lonely forever. You don't have to be totally bereft of actual real life friendships, but just to start to build your confidence. This is how I built my confidence. I was a very insecure, resentful, hostile person when I was younger, right? I don't have those feelings anymore. That's not to say that I don't have some of those knee-jerk reactions here or there, but that's not what defines me any longer. But what really built up my confidence was reading a lot and thinking of these people in the past or in the future as my contemporaries. And that allowed me to create friendships based on those kinds of commonalities, because I felt like, I do have something to offer. And other people that are similar out there, because there are people that do think like you, right? There are people that do think like you. And Anyway, let's just, again, I don't want to get too heavy, right? I know that some people are getting very nervous because, and here's the funny part, right? The reason why you'd be getting very nervous is if I'm telling you things right now that you know are true, guess what? You now have this little voice in your head that's telling you, oh my God, I have to do certain things now. I do have to sort of like give up maybe a game or two. I do have to spend my time doing other things. And since that is in fact the case, I'm going to have to live my life differently. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe you're not ready yet. But I want that voice to begin in your mind, right? It's good. That discomfort is a good thing. Don't treat it as an enemy. Don't be hostile towards it, okay? But let's just back away a little bit and just game a little bit more to, if you're like hyperventilating, maybe you're going to calm down a little bit as this pretty little cat stalks its entrance. Am I stuck now? Like, what's going on? All right, so I left from there. There's nothing for me to do there, right? How would I get up here? All right, so one thing that I used to do, like when I was playing Doom as a kid, like if you ever played Doom, if you're of my age, you would know that there were like these like secret doors, and sometimes for you to like get all the secrets, you would have to like literally go against the wall, every single wall, the entire perimeter of a level, and hit spacebar, and then the character, right, he'd be like right, and eventually you'd find like a secret door that would open. And that kind of like I think in terms of like situating video games like alongside the rest of reality, it does sort of tell you something that I have to say things like, oh, if you're of a certain age, you would know what I'm talking about. Because video games, they really don't, wait, is this a new place? Oh, maybe it is. Like video games, they do date very quickly. Like a lot of stuff that I used to play as a kid, like my first strategy game, I absolutely loved playing Dune 2. I loved playing Dune 2. Dune 2 as a phenomenon, like it's literally better in and of itself than Dune the books or Dune the movie, right? It's a higher accomplishment. Being like one of the first strategy games, and also just being like it's more complex than the books. The books are just garbage, right? I tried reading as an adult. It was unbelievably bad. Oh, damn. But you can't play a game like Dune 2 as an adult because the interface is just so bad, right? The interface is bad. You need all these updates, and that's not the case for the majority of great art, right? Like you could theoretically read great Chinese poetry that is still wonderful, a millennium and a half later, right? But when it comes to like the so-called classic video games, even stuff like Chrono Trigger, like I love Chrono Trigger on the Super Nintendo. I loved Chrono Cross. That was on PlayStation, right? I loved WarCraft 2, but like you can't play WarCraft 2 now. Granted, this is getting better. Like if you play WarCraft 3, you could still play it, right? It still has tons of strategy, right? It still has tons of like novelty, right? It still has a lot going for it. So I think in the future, like to the credit of video games, like that basic, the gamification aspect, like I'm not even talking about the art, right? I'm very skeptical, thus far about gaming and art, but thus far the gamification when it comes to games, like that part is getting better a little bit, right? So I will give credit where credit is due. So let's see. Can I do anything here? All right, so I guess I would just like walk around until there's like an environment that you could, okay, here, yeah, good, that you could interact with. Sorry, let me just check because I had some notes of like things that I wanted to discuss. All right, I mean, we're getting through it. Getting through it. Again, I'm not trying to scare people too early, right? You'll be very scared by the time this video is over, but it'll be good for you. And sorry guys that you're watching this in a window. This was, you know, I've never streamed games or anything like that. When I was trying to record this through OBS full screen, it was very laggy, right? Not while I was playing it, but when I was watching the video after the fact, it was very laggy. All these like graphical glitches, it would just totally be unwatchable. So let's see, is there something they could do here? Okay, so you could go up here, and I could also go up here. Let me just check this out first. If there's anything. Nope. I will say thus far, I wish, you know, maybe this is going to change, but I wish, because like so far, like you could go places, right? You could like hit space and jump here, jump there, but a lot of the places that you would jump so far, they're all dead ends. Like there hasn't been like some sort of secret, right? And I feel like games, like one of the ways that they release dopamine is they allow secrets to come at you, you know, well enough. Like speaking of Chrono Trigger, like again, if you're old enough to have played this, I remember like in Chrono Trigger, you had like that sealed door, and it would be like many, like dozens and dozens of hours. For me, it would be weeks and months of game time, because again, not knowing any English, right, I would all constantly get stuck. It would literally be months and sometimes years between like finishing a game. And this thing that was like a secret, like, oh, there's a sealed door. Years after seeing that, you would figure out how to open it, and then you'd backtrack all the places where you had sealed containers, sealed doors, and it would be like a wonderful secret to unravel, right? It really like played with you emotionally. I wonder what the relationship here is, like when you now it causes electricity to sort of. I wonder if you could cause like a fire. My default state is like I was like definitely a pyromaniac when I was a kid. That was like one of the things before I was like a full-blown addict, and I was still like sort of like, you know, hang out in Brooklyn, going to like freight yards. I loved like the various train yards or whatever. I would constantly be trying to like set stuff on fire. So my default state is like pyromania. Like I always like want to be like, what's going on here? This cat looks like so one of my cats, Cookie, picked her up from a colony a few blocks away a couple years back. She needed a ton of work. When I say like there's like realism to this game, like, you know, when I picked up this cat, she was like just over 3 years old, but she already had to have all her teeth removed. She had like these like bacterial infections. I had to keep her downstairs in the basement here for like 2 months as she got over her bacterial infections. I had to get her spayed. So cats go through a lot, and she had a son that I named Stoat, who looked a lot like this cat. I was gonna actually pick him up first, or rather, I didn't even intend to pick up Cookie. I didn't even realize that who she was or what her relationship to the colony was, but they were both born indoors, which is why they were so friendly. Somebody picked up Stoat before I did. They were thinking exactly what I was thinking. Right, so hopefully he has a great home now. All right, so let's see what's happening here. Yeah, so he reminds me of Stoat. That was the segue. Patreon.com/automacination if you want to support me getting lost, right? What am I missing here? Am I on one of these like sort of dead ends? It's, you know, it's a possibility. I don't really see an easy... Well, actually, wait, hold on. Maybe it could be like this. The music is growing more and more. I mean, in terms of like the atmosphere, but it still is. It still is an issue. And I want you to stick around, guys, to the very end of this video, because by the end of it, right, if you're still confused and you're like, Alex, you're just giving me all these intangibles, I will give you a straight up superpower, right? I'll give you a total superpower, and here's a little clue. So after I read Soul and Ice and I started getting into reading, and my life just started just totally blossoming at that point. I still had, you know, tons of like what felt like dead ends. I remember like months after, you know, so it was 2003 when I first started reading, and I had read like dozens of books in that fall period, you know, staying home from school, just reading. Getting internships, that's another big thing I started doing. I started staying home from school, and you know, I always look kind of old, right? I had like shaved eyebrows, pierced ears, shaved head. I was like 5'6" at the time, 5'5", 185 pounds. So I looked like a big boy. I definitely didn't look like a teenager. I looked big. I looked older. I looked in my 20s. So New York City is like well known for if you're like messing around too much, the truancy cops pick you up. Nobody ever bothered me, probably because I'm white. I also learned that pretty early on. All my non-white friends were just like non-stop harassed, but I was never picked up by truancy. I would like get all these internships, and I was just constantly just like, you know, doing all these kinds of things. And so I was reading a lot, but I still had these like sort of like dead ends. And one of them was, I remember very distinctly, if you have seen other videos, maybe you know the story, but if you just clicked on this for the first time, you don't know this story yet. I was on the train, right, going to Manhattan, and I had this book with me. Right. At the time, I had declared I'm a Marxist, and I was reading Vladimir Lenin's *The State and Revolution*. And I remember it was a 45-minute train ride from my house in Coney Island to Bryant Park, right, around Times Square. And on that 45-minute train ride, I was reading the same paragraph in *State and Revolution* over and over again, and I had like total tears in my eyes because I didn't understand what I was reading, right? I kept reading it. I didn't get the grammar. I didn't get the words. I didn't get what he was saying. And I was like, I can't move on to the next paragraph until I get this. But I'm not getting it. How am I supposed to figure out what's going on? So when I got home that day, I had another book that was a little bit easier, right? So it was like, you know, if you have something easier to start with, like you don't want to be in a situation where you're just like constantly putting yourself through various difficulties, right? So, well, maybe there's something here actually. Yeah, okay, so let's see. I didn't come from here, right? Okay. Maybe is this new? So I had this book, Leon Trotsky's The Revolution Betrayed. And it was an easier book, but it was still pretty difficult, and I still had to like really take my time with it. So I was like, you know what, if I'm gonna take my time with this, I'm really gonna take my time. So, and one of my sort of like jags where I wasn't going to school, I spent maybe like 8-9 days just like straight, not just reading the book. What I was doing was I had a bunch of index cards, and every paragraph of the book I would summarize in my own words. And any word I didn't know, I would look up. Any idea that I didn't recognize, I would look up. Any event that was referenced, any name that was referenced that I didn't know, I would look all this stuff up. And I did this for the entire book. This took me about 7-8 consecutive days, right? I did this a lot on weekends especially, right? Just kind of like in my bedroom, taking these notes, writing everything down. And by the time that I finished the book, I was like, all right, let me see what you know, let me take a crack at *State and Revolution* again. And I did. I opened it up, and not only was I able to read that paragraph that I didn't get, I was able to easily read the next. I was able to read pages upon pages without stopping. And I realized how just unbelievably powerful that was, right? It was totally powerful. I realized early on, like, you know, I have this sort of like, you know, I have this like fixation on dopamine, whether it's like food or video games, but isn't this also a means of getting dopamine? I mean, like, let me tell you, like, I never had a feeling as strong as the one that I had when here I was reading this book that was literally putting me, you know, in tears earlier. And here I am, like, able to do it. I remember, like, at the time, like, I never had that feeling before. It was very different from the dopamine you get from games. It was very different even the dopamine you'd get from sex, right? As a kid, right? You're very horny, like, every springtime, you're sort of like looking around and like I remember like every springtime, like in high school, whatever, like April, May rolls around, and you're constantly just like the only thing you're thinking about is girls, right? But there was no feeling like that, right? There really was nothing like it. So I wonder if it's like the same thing. I would have to put a bucket in here. Let me see. No, you can't interact with that. So I guess like what I'm telling you is getting these other sources of. I wonder if I could do something. Like, what is this? This looks like it could like plug into something, right? Maybe there's a. Let me see. Oh, that's what I did. So yeah, I took that out. Then it starts again. Okay. So anyway, what I'm saying is there's other sources of dopamine that could give you not only some of the same similar feelings, because I mean, like some of it is similar, but things that you've never experienced before. And here's the thing, like the more that you get yourself just like totally like fixated on gaming, the less that you have an opportunity to have these other kinds of experiences, right? And it's a real shame because there's a ton of other things that you're able to do, right? There's a ton of other things that are interesting. There's a ton of other things that would give you the same feelings. I wonder, is this like supposed to be like a famous painting of some sort? It almost looks a little bit like a Wyeth, like an Andrew Wyeth. So, when I started reading more and more, one thing that I realized is, I couldn't. And here's like another thing that happens magically, right? When you start reading, if you start viewing these people as your colleagues and as your contemporaries, you realize that you can't just. What is this? You realize that you can't just read one topic, right? I was really into politics, but I was like, everybody's talking about philosophy, everybody's talking about art, everybody's talking about like things that I'm not used to and things that I'm not totally comfortable with. I remember when I discovered Dan Schneider's website Cosmoetica, and I was thinking like, okay, well, he's into film and he's also doing film reviews on top of all this other stuff, but I can't do that, right? I can't do that for myself. I'm too busy with poetry. I'm too busy with this. I'm too busy with that. But those are all self-limiting beliefs, because I was having that thought in like 2008, 2009. And just a few years later, despite thinking earlier that, I can't have movies in my life because I don't have the time for it, I end up writing like, one of the biggest books on Woody Allen's film criticism ever. You could find it on Amazon now. Search Alex Sheremet, Woody Allen, Reel to Reel. One of the most comprehensive books of its type ever written. Just a few years after saying that it's impossible, right? And I'll get into the story of that book in a little bit, but the point is, when you start understanding that you're not just living for yourself, you're not just living for the present time, you want to allow other people to have an inheritance from you that are yet to be born, what you think of as possible and not possible, right? But especially what's possible, all of that truly, let me see some of these titles, all that starts to truly multiply. Guide to, what is that? Synthetic wine. All right. 1842. It's almost like a steampunk kind of like, aesthetic. When you start recognizing who your true contemporaries are, all these like self-limiting beliefs, they do start to go away, right? To get it, just to give another example, like I first started like easy, right? Like little poems or whatever. I was like, I want to do writing. And the reason what I thought that was in one of these jags where I was like reading something that, a political writer would write, they mentioned, Harlem Renaissance or whatever. So I was like, all right, let me go to the library, picked up a book on Harlem Renaissance poetry. And there was a poem in there. I've talked about this a lot, but again, for a lot of you, it might be new. There was a poem in that anthology, right, by County called Heritage. And I remember when I read it, I was like, first I had already sort of like gotten over religion. I was becoming an atheist, or perhaps technically an agnostic. And so like it sort of like kind of like moved me a little bit. And I was like, I really need to understand what makes this poem so good. Like, I know that this poem is great, but I don't know why. I don't have the vocabulary for it. And I want to read enough and learn enough that I could figure out why that is, right? So the entire world like just really starts to totally expand, right? You start understanding there's so much more than you. And I was like, you know what? I want to be a poet. And, spurts and starts and ends, and, wasn't really working all that well. But eventually I was able to write successful poetry. But as I read poetry, I was like, okay, well, poetry is fine. It's a page or maybe longer, but I'm never going to be able to write a novel, will I? I mean, like, what, an entire novel? But a year after I had that thought, I wrote my first short story. And it was a good short story. And then I wrote even better short stories. And then a year after that, I finished my first novel, right? So all these beliefs that you have, like, again, like if you're somebody that has an addiction, you of course have everything from self-loathing to self-limiting beliefs, right? And you constantly think like, greatness isn't for me. Like, what? Like, why? Why would I be great at anything? Why would I be even good at anything? But this is literally, this is all in your head. Now, there might be some sort of underpinning reality, right? I'm not saying that you would necessarily become a good, a great, much less a good writer, right? That's not necessarily in the cards for anyone. But operating from this thought without even trying, I mean, you're never going to find out, right? You can't start with the assumption that you can't do X, Y, and Z, right? Because if you start from that assumption has no, has like no chance to do anything other than be what it is, right? Which is your own self-limiting belief, right? You could find by taking baby steps, like, you could do even small things and then build up to something greater. Maybe you start doing small steps and that's all you are able to do. Maybe, you start reading or something and you realize that, I could read, I could understand, but maybe I can't write. Maybe that's it, right? Maybe your life is just simply going to be, watching movies, going to museums, cultivating friendships based on mutual strengths, mutual interests. And that's fine too, right? You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be a creator, right? You could be, any number of things. But the point that I'm making is you can't start from that assumption from the get-go. You can't start with any assumptions. Especially if you're an adolescent watching this, the entire point of adolescence is you have to push against boundaries. That's the entire point. Like, why are kids so goddamn selfish, right? Why are kids such little shits, right? The reason is very simple. It's because biologically speaking, nature is giving you this opportunity to be selfish and to test yourself against the rest of the world, right? To see what you could get away with, to push boundaries, to push buttons. And if you're not going to use that opportunity to really test yourself in ways that actually matter, right? I don't mean like joining a gang. I don't mean, like some like nonsense. Like, I mean doing something worthwhile. If you don't use that opportunity, that window as you get older, it does get smaller and smaller. But even in that case, even as that window gets a little bit smaller, I want you to keep in mind the fact that just look around, right? Like, if you feel like a total fuck up, think about the fact that, like, Nancy Pelosi, for example, right? This old time Democratic Party politician. She's been around for so long, and she has a net worth of over $100 million. She hasn't done anything worthwhile for anyone that I can think of, with the exception possibly of calling stock market bottoms, right? Because sure enough, like every single time there's like some sort of important vote, right, where legislators are voting on tech regulation or whatever, you find some kind of disclosure. Nancy Pelosi took some sort of short-term option trade on Google stock, on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever, because she knows the results, right? It's preordained, right? She knows the results of these votes. Most recently in June, when we had the most insane sort of headlines, right, about equities, about inflation, about all of that. My guess is that was peak inflation, but even if it wasn't, I think it's kind of telling that during the peak of these hysterics, suddenly she makes a disclosure, millions of dollars, not of like long-term, stock buys, but we're talking about options, right? They were 1 year options. So she believes that stocks are going to go up in that time period, even if it's just a short-term trade. That's literally all that I can think of that she's done. If you follow her portfolio, maybe she hasn't done a single thing worthwhile in her life, but god damn it, she's a great trader, isn't she? Because she has all this information nobody else has. And, like both politicians, right? Like whether it's Democratic Party, Republicans, right? I'm not a partisan in this regard. I think all of them are pieces of shit. They are right now in a race to the bottom, right? Who could be the most toxic? Who could be the most divorced from popular opinion and from what is necessary, not only to America, but to the rest of the world, right? Whether it's, Democrats that are sort of seeing inflation happen and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is raising taxes, right, on the wealthy, which is totally disinflationary. Instead, they're cutting the deficit, right? And when they're cutting the deficit, what that means is people like you who might be unemployed or getting unemployment, that gets cut. If you're getting Medicaid or getting other kind of health care, that gets cut. But what they refuse to do is they refuse to raise taxes, right? So they're doing rate hikes, which again, right, to the extent that there's an argument as to whether rate hikes are in fact even disinflationary. I mean, some of it seems a little counterintuitive to me, right? Like if rate hikes are supposed to cool down the economy, well, if you're making home ownership essentially more expensive for the average person because they can't pay literally double the rate of what it used to be or triple the rate or whatever, that is also its own kind of tax, its own kind of inflation. Like I'm not one of these inflation hawks that believes that inflation is some sort of evil, right? I view it as a necessary evil that in the best case scenario, it's for the sake of something greater, right? People say all the time, like, oh, isn't it so terrible that a dollar used to be worth so much more 100 or 200 years ago? Why can't we go back to 200 years when a dollar was worth like 100 times more or whatever? Well, the reason is you can't go back because the reason why like the dollar was worth less is because the standard of living was so much lower, right? So the dollar's worth more. Now we have a higher standard of living. The price of that is inflation. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with paying inflation as a price if you're getting something bigger in return. But over the last 30, 40 years, these people that get elected, right, these are supposed to be the experts. The reason why I'm going in this tangent, right, it's not pointless. I'm going in this tangent because all these people that are supposed to be experts, that are supposed to be good at what they do, that are supposed to be totally not fuck-ups, they start with every advantage in life, and yet they're doing more harm to the planet than you are. Even if you're an addict, even if all you've done today is get up and game and piss into a water bottle because you can't even bring yourself to go to the bathroom, you've probably done less harm to the world than they did. And you started at a much lower level than they did. Okay? So one thing that you learn as you get older, especially as you get more confident, is you really start understanding that you could call bullshit on so much on the planet. So many people are just like total bullshitters. So many people are just not, they're not about anything, right? So if you feel ashamed about your life, think about the fact that there's so many other people that deserve to feel ashamed and don't. And the way that you could get past your shame is you could do something better, right? So I'm gonna give you a hint, right, in terms of like that superpower that I alluded to earlier. So one thing that I'm noticing now, and I'm able to notice it because I am old enough to have seen this change transpire, right? I grew up with the internet, right? I did start going with the internet early on, right? So it's not like I'm some sort of like, totally like old man that, finds all this stuff new. But growing up on the internet back in the 90s and the early 2000s looked very different than growing up on the internet today. Right now, all your friends are on social media. Right now, you never get to disconnect from anyone or anything. Right now, you still have to like feel like competing with them, like you have to show off, like there's still all these like social pressures. And because of what like social pressures do in terms of dopamine levels, right? In terms of like giving you those kinds of rushes, in terms of giving you those kinds of like little rewards, people are developing all kinds of addictions that are just very novel, right? I mean, a social media addiction is a very new thing. Personally, I've never really had social media addictions. I've never, like, I don't even have a Facebook account now, like not for like years at this point. I don't understand like why people are like really into social media, but I could sort of intellectually understand it, okay? But given the fact that this is the case, and you have everything from games to YouTube to Instagram to now TikTok, right, is a huge thing now for kids. Attention spans have totally cratered, right? Podcasts, like anytime that people are working out, walking down the street, doing dishes, cooking dinner, anything, right? You always need that sort of like buzzing in your ear, right? Some sort of voice, something giving you information, even if it's pointless information, even if it's not going anywhere. This is what people want. This is what people feel like they need. But because this is going on, their attention spans are totally non-existent now, and this is very new. And since their attention spans are totally non-existent, people can't even imagine sitting back with a book and finishing it. And when I say a book, I don't mean like, like a picture book or a comic book. I mean like a real book. They can't do it. And if you know that people can't do it, and you yourself can't do it, by forcing yourself to read something serious, something good and worthwhile, an hour a day at least, but closer to 2 hours if you could handle it. Let's start with an hour, keep it simple. Maybe even start with half an hour, right? I understand that your brain is probably fried if you have all these various addictions. Start with half an hour, move up to an hour, move up to 2 hours. Get that attention span working again, the way that it's designed to work, right? Get the pleasure of finishing a book, learning something new, enriching your life, and by enriching your life, not in the selfish way, but finding a way to bring that outward, right? If you're a male and you feel romantically it's very tough, women are getting more and more educated. It seems like society is geared more and more towards their success and not yours. Well, guess what? You can't cry about it, and you can't beg someone to help you. You have to help yourself. And the way that you could do that in terms of a superpower is do the thing that nobody else is able to do now, which is read, right? And there's like, you could start with anything. I would recommend perhaps if you're a gamer, start with Mark Twain, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. This is an excellent book. I forget exactly how this time warp occurs, but the basic premise is the protagonist and narrator of the novel finds himself in a time warp where he goes from the 1800s, where he has modern scientific knowledge, what back then was called modern scientific knowledge, and he finds himself in the medieval era. And it's a very clever book. You see all the ways in which that, like, if you play like some of these like medieval games or whatever, all the ways that gets occluded in games or perhaps other things that you've seen or read. Very, very clever book, well written, very worthwhile. You see writing, like if you're used to writing from video games, this is writing of a totally different kind of caliber. Go to other Mark Twain books. Just randomly hear what I have. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, right? Here's one of my favorite novels by Tanizaki, Semper for Nettles. A very, very, very alluring title, is it not? Right, very poetic title. The Night Country. This is simple, but if you're interested in nature in any way, right? If you're interested in poetic expression, this is a great book for that. Here's an easy one, Charlie LaDuff, Work and Other Sins. if you have a working class background and you want to see it treated in a way that's given respect, that's given poetry, right? That's not part of this Republican, Democrat race to the bottom, right? This is an excellent way to do that. Take a look at automachination.com, alexsheremet.com, this channel. See the kinds of books that get talked about, the movies that get talked about, the artworks that get talked about. This truly is a superpower because not only does it allow you something to bring to the table, right? Whether it's like, even if your end goal is ultimately like, oh, I want to get laid. Let's say that you're a 15-year-old virgin and you're like, I don't understand how everybody around me is getting girlfriends and I'm not. Well, you got to bring something interesting to the table. Like I remember being pretty shocked when I was in high school how many girls were into me simply because I was just like so different, right? I was fat. I was like insecure. Like I remember like one time when I really got morbidly obese. I was like over like a girl's house. So this was like even when I was like 18 years old. And I had gotten like really, really fat at that point. I was over some girl's house and I was so ashamed of being fat that although she clearly wanted to do something, I was too ashamed to take my shirt off and I literally just like left and I never talked to her again. But you do notice this weird thing like where, okay, like, well, I think I ought to be not desirable, right? Especially if you're an addict. Of course you think that about yourself. I should not be desirable. I'm not bringing anything to the table. I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. But if little by little you start doing things that make you an interesting human being, suddenly people are interested in you. Suddenly people want your time and attention. And now you're in the position finally to decide who gets your time and attention, okay? So reading truly is that superpower. And it's a superpower that gets more and more powerful as time goes on. Because, again, attention spans progressively are cratering. People can't read. It's a sad state of reality. It's a sad state of affairs. Sometimes I think, what am I even doing writing these complicated novels, doing these complex shows? People's brains aren't in it. But again, these are not my contemporaries. I need to leave something for the future to inherit because that's the only thing that's ethical to do to begin with, right? But beyond, what's ethical or not, just like think about just being like if you're like one of those like selfish kids, make yourself interesting. Don't you want attention from girls? Don't you want something useful to do? Right? I think it's kind of telling how I went from these total addictions to when I found, other outlets. The only way that I could really play a game is like in a situation like this. Like, I mean, look, I wouldn't really be out here like playing this right now if I wasn't making a video for you guys. Because right now, my biggest dopamine rush is not what's happening from the screen. It's the fact that I know there's going to be somebody out there that's going to get something from it. Someone's going to leave a positive comment. Someone's going to think that it's worthwhile, right? This gives me that same rush, but it's a richer kind of rush. Oh, this is very pretty. Look how well they made that. Like, just look at the wallpaper. I mean, this game is well done from what I could tell thus far. Let me see if I could play a little bit more. I know that I've been like ranting for a while. Okay, so this says need help. What is that? Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Interesting. I remember like when I was like 14 years old, I was thinking like, will I ever get a girlfriend? Like, is that even possible? How would I do it? Like, what does that look like? What do I have to do? Blah, blah, blah. Wait, a door open. Which door is it? Is it this? Like, let's go. Was it this door? Oh yeah, here we go. Like, so look, if you got that thought in you right now, how do I get attention from the opposite sex? Obviously it's possible. Everybody should think that. You said find a body. Where's this? body gonna be? Yikes. Ooh, 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 ooh. What is that? Alright, so I got something here. I'm gonna drop it. Maybe here, yeah. Okay. Oh, maybe all these will do different things. Let's see. Does that change anything? Oh, the door is now locked. So they locked me in here. Ooh, a cat truly in this situation would be going insane that they're locked somewhere. I can't. Maybe there's a bunch of these actually somewhere. Look at that lever. All right. If I jump on this lever. I gotta do all these progressively, yeah. Damn, what a smart cat. I love a smart cat. If you guys want cats on your own, like if you're looking to get a cat, honestly, get to know the cats in your neighborhood, okay? They are so worthwhile to keep because it's this odd thing where, like, you know, like a lot of people want like pedigreed cats or whatever, but cats on the street, they need to have a certain level of intelligence, right? It's kind of like, you know, it's survival of the fittest in a sense. Those that are sort of like old enough to survive, they often have something going on, you know, like in their heads that allows them to survive. They're probably like my cat Cookie used to be like a total like tree climber. There's something called tree cats and there's something called bush cats. I got a bush cat and I also got a tree cat, and you could tell based on their little behaviors which one is which likes to go in higher areas, which likes to climb. You know, if they ever do get the opportunity to climb again. But street cats are hardy. Street cats are intelligent. Street cats have an affection that you work for, right? It's kind of like having a relationship with a human being. It's not just something that you get willy-nilly. So I love street cats now. Wait, was that 3? Oh, I already had 3, so I just need 1 more. Maybe if I walk around some of these. Maybe I could go into lever again. Wait now. Well, let's see this. This doesn't allow me to. There's no other like environment interactions, right? Maybe there's something else here. Let's see. I do wonder what the idea behind this is, right? If this is supposed to be cyberpunk, like set in the future, you know, like one thing here, like you wouldn't have. I mean, it could be like for aesthetic purposes, right? I mean, there's always like you always want something a little dingy, remote, right? Whatever, but you wouldn't have screens like this. Right, you notice that as technology progresses, things get smaller and smaller and smaller. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with the gaming, so let me just talk a little more. So for Patreon subscribers, I'm going to have like a very special video end of the month. That's going to be up. And for non-subscribers, I mean, I'm going to obviously keep most things free, right? This always kind of like the idea. You don't want to put everything behind a paywall. And one thing I want to do more and more of is do Russian poetry. I don't see Russian poetry discussed that much myself. You know, being a fluent Russian speaker, I would have like an insight into this that perhaps most people, even like translators or whatever, might not have. So I'm gonna be like, you know, reciting Russian poetry, translating it, analyzing it, that's going to be coming to this channel as well. There's actually like some topical Russian poetry that I could think of even now. Alexander Blok. There's a poem called Noch ulica Fnari Apteka, which means night, street, light, pharmacy, and it goes Noch ulica Fnari Apteka. Wait. Alright. Ночь, улица, фонарь, аптека. Безмысленный и тусклый свет. Живи еще хоть четверть века. Все будет так, исхода нет. Умрешь. Начнешь опять сначала, и повторится все, как в старе. Ночь. Ледяная рябь канала. Аптека, улица, фонарь. And a rough translation is night, street light, pharmacy, a pale and meaningless light. Live even for another quarter century. All will be the same. There is no exit. You'll die. Start again from the beginning. And it will repeat the same like in days of old. Night, an icy ripple in the canal. Pharmacy, street lamp, right? And if you have an addiction, isn't that pretty topical? This idea that you will be essentially just, every single day is the same, isn't it? You're repeating it again and again. I mean, I know what that's like. I know what it's like waking up every day, same exact thing. You do the same activity, but it's not an activity that does anything for you. It's an activity that gives you a very limited kind of pleasure, right? And even after a while, honestly, does it even, after a while, your depression is not, the gaming is not even what gives you ultimately the pleasure, right? It's kind of like the comfort, and also the depression itself, right? The depression itself gives you the pleasure, right? Think about, be honest with yourself. Are you in fact addicted to the gaming, or are you at this point addicted to that feeling of the depression, right? That is a reality that I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily think about, but it strikes me as very real, right? And come on, why am I stuck here? I need that final, but where would I get it, right? Where would I get it? That's the thing. I mean, this is fun, right? I'm enjoying this, but assuming that I solve this problem, this puzzle right now, what then? I could translate a Russian poem right now in a new way, in a way that nobody has translated before, right? With my own insights, my own life experiences, right? Every translator is going to be different, by definition. And that puzzle, that is also a puzzle, right? You go through a dictionary, you start understanding, why this archaic word was used as opposed to another word. That is a puzzle. That is a game, right? Just like in Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, right? The scientist in that book who creates Ice 9, he says, I don't understand why people play all these made-up games when there's so many real games going on every single day. And that is something for people with addictions to truly think about, isn't it? Right? I mean, think about it. There's so many real games going on, right? You could like right now, there's people watching this channel that speak another language. You could open up a book of poetry in your native language, and you could translate it, and you could put it on YouTube, and you could have other people. Forget about the friendships in your street. Maybe you live in the suburbs somewhere and nobody gets you, right? I remember that as well. You could put up a video right now translating a poem from your native language, knowing full well that nobody else is doing it. You could do it. You could figure it out, right? That's a game too. That is a game. It does give you the dopamine rush. That first comment, that first subscriber, that's a dopamine rush. And the difference, however, is that it's not a narcissistic, self-indulgent, self-absorbed dopamine rush. It's a rush that is leading to something else in the future. Not even in the future, in the present time, right? The future could be as theoretical as like a day away, right? As soon as that video goes up. Think about that, right? You could even possibly, if it's an especially good translation and you put up that video, you could get a hot girl messaging you, right? And suddenly the version gets laid. All because you translated a fucking poem online. I mean, think about it. That's a possibility. If you're a shy guy, and of course I'm speaking to the men right now, I'm also shy myself. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I'm shy. If I go in a bar somewhere, I'm going to sit down with a book. I'm not going to start a conversation with somebody. I'm going to make people come to me. And if you don't want to talk to me, too bad, so sad, it's your loss, right? This kind of, don't be in a scarcity mindset. Have people come to you, right? I don't do this thing like where, I get like obsessive freaks on my channel, right? I don't understand how people like literally have nothing to do except like stalk my channel, stalk other channels, leave comments. I have the only comments that I've ever left on people's channels are people that I personally know. People like Ethan Pinch, right, who runs the New House channel, right, and others. I'd leave comments on them or whatever, but I'm not going to fucking leave a comment on some random ass person getting an argument with them. Like, what a total waste of time. I got things to do. Don't you got some respect for your time, goddammit? But again, like if you're a shy person, as I have always been, like I have always met women, right? Not that I haven't met women in like normal everyday circumstances. Like I have, like, in college, I met women, all of that, like has happened in schools, whatever, jobs. It was always nice, like when I was like working or whatever in schools, and if I would develop like crushes or mutual crushes on different, like on coworkers or whatever, it was, it made work more fun, definitely. But generally speaking, the vast majority of the women that I dated, it was me leaving, it was me putting up ads somewhere, if play to your strengths. There's nothing wrong with that. Play to your strengths, whatever it is. If you're like a shy guy, but you could sort of express yourself well for whatever reason, learn how to like, how to do Tinder well, right? Learn how to do, like I met my wife back when Craigslist allowed personals ads. I met plenty of women through Craigslist. I would put personals ads and I would make them insane. I would make these ads absolutely insane. I would have like everything from, a photo of me with like, like a cartoon dick drawn on me, like big, like pulling out, right? With like a thought bubble with like a, a quote from like a Wallace Stevens poem. And all my photos, they would look different. Like I would make myself like intriguing and weird. And that's the thing. And the reason, and that's the thing. Don't be ashamed of your weirdness. Like I said from the very beginning, like if I'm going to be meeting women, especially after I had like a bunch of like, early failed relationships when I was much younger, right? Relationships that were like abusive, not on my end, right? But relationships that were abusive. I was like, you know what? I'm only going to meet people that are like me in some way. So I'm going to do things that are absolutely off the wall weird. And if they don't want to respond to the ad because they're like, oh, this guy seems really weird, they're a goddamn normie then. They don't deserve to be with me. Why would I give them any of my goddamn attention, right? They're a normie, I'm not. So I'm going to make myself I'm going to embrace these qualities of myself. And I'm going to, be off the wall. And the only women that would respond are those that would go for it, those that would appreciate that part of me, those that are themselves in some way like that, right? Even if they don't publicly show that face, right? My wife is, publicly, she really sort of it's funny. Like I have stories, like I remember like when we were going to Amsterdam one time, and I do have a sort of a shady kind of quality to me. I gotta admit, I was wearing like a hoodie. I always look a little, a little off. And I was like, fuck, they're really gonna fuck with me at this airport, won't they? And sure enough, like they were calling me up, like, Alex, Sheremet, come to, the desk. We need to, and they were, I forget what they were checking, but they were going through my bag. And as soon as that happened, like my wife like showed up. She was like, "Sir, what's going on? I'm his wife." And they're like, "Oh, you guys are together? You're married?" And she was like, "Yes." And they completely leave me alone. So like if you get the right wife that is able to be, very prim and proper out in the street, she's gonna allow you to like get away with a whole lot, right? Otherwise, like you might find yourself in bad situations. At this point, I'm not even like, I'm not even doing it. I'm just kind of like going back and forth. I'm just completely stuck now. But at least I'm talking to you guys, and even though you're not getting much gaming, you are getting pearls of wisdom from a 34-year-old man who's going to turn 35 next month. But like if you're a weirdo, embrace that. Right? But also remember, there's also good weird and bad weird. Know the difference. Embrace the good weird, and get other people to like it. And don't change that part of yourself for the sake of like getting some kind of normie girl. Like you don't want to date normies. You want to date people like you, right? I learned that the hard way. You want to date people like you. Jesus, like seriously, what? Like I don't see. Okay, so. Let's just look. Is there anything that looks like one of those little like gadgets? Can I like break something here, or I forget. Was there anything up here? Did I? Yeah, I did grab something up here, didn't I? Christ. There must be something. I'm gonna crack this code. I'm feeling the same tears in my eyes, right, that I felt as a kid reading Lenin's The State and Revolution. Oh, here we go. Yes. So, and that's the thing. Like when I was crying on the train, essentially. As a 16-year-old teenager who should not have been crying, the shame would have been not getting past it. The shame would have been like, okay, I feel bad about this. I'm uncomfortable reading this. It's too hard. The shame would have been giving up, right? The shame would have been given up. Ooh, look at that. There is like some variety to these robots that I'm appreciating right now, right? It's not just like the same sort of sprite, let's call it. That's what it's called in coding, at least. I remember when I was learning coding back in the old days, and I took this course where I had to like make a video game. They had some like skeleton code, but I had to make a video game functional, and I had to like have these like sprites operate. So I appreciate some of this. I mean, like knowing a little bit of coding, what goes into physics, what goes into all of that. I do wonder why, like, so new socks, it says up there. I mean, some of the variety here is nice, right? Like in terms of like diegetic, like narrative flow. No. Oh, here we go. I can't get over how much this guy looks like Stoat. Something fell out. And that's the thing, like that's another thing you appreciate about this. Some of the, even if it's totally gamified realism, like something like a cat wanting to like knock over a box. That's what cats do, right? Cats are curious. I would hope that human beings, would be able to have some of the same curiosity in their lives. And they don't, right? No attention span. Like, just observe a cat and the attention span a cat has, right? It's incredible. compared to the average human being these days. What does this drop? Oh, nothing. It's not doing anything. No, I don't want to drop this. Well, I guess we'll drop it down here. No. I'll drop it. Here, space. I feel like I could put this somewhere. But what is that, right? Like, that's... I feel like this robot or like this machine should be able to like intake whatever this thing is, like. Let me try to actually get on this head and see what happens if I drop it. Well, I can't now. It's no longer. What happens if I drop it here? Anything? Wait. If I drop it here, that shoots up. Does that mean anything? Or is that supposed to be like Let's see. Okay, they're not letting me drop it now. Alright, let's just see if there's anything. Well, let's see here. Okay. Jesus, people. Oh, I said I was going to talk about the Woody Allen book. So, I mean, look, you know, here's another example of something that I thought was totally impossible and beyond me. Now, generally speaking, I'm a slow reader and I'm a slow writer, right? So if you're somebody like me who wants to make this your life and you happen to be very slow at it, you know, it sucks because you have to do a lot of sacrifices, right? Like Dan Schneider of Cosmoetica, he like, I remember like one time we went to a museum together, like the Pacific War Museum or whatever in Texas, and he was like I was like watching his eyes read the sort of notes, and I saw how quickly his eyes were like going from line to line, and I was like, and like by the time that I was like on the like a third way done, he was already completely done with the thing, right? He had already completely read it, right? And I just don't operate that way. I mean, there are times when I definitely like speed up when I read, but generally speaking, that's not how I operate. And also in my writing, like it takes me a while. Like I try to write every single day, but it takes me a while to actually get stuff out. Today was a bit of an exception where, you know, it was one of those like magical days where you just sit down, everything just like flows. The paragraphs are nice, the poetry is unforced, you don't have to do much editing. I love that. But it doesn't happen that often, right? When it happens, you got to latch onto it. And if you thought you're going to be writing for an hour or 2 hours that day, but it's flowing, guess what? You're going to be writing all day because you want to latch onto it when it happens. But somebody contacted me, right, to do this Woody Allen book like years and years ago. And he told me, okay, I want all the movies of Woody Allen, which is like, you know, over 40 at the time, covered, and I also want you to read these articles and engage with the criticism. And I was like, all right, sure, how long? And he told me 4 months, and I was like, 4 months? But what he wanted actually was less than what I ultimately ended up providing. So he wanted like little summaries and just sort of like, you know, introductions to sort of like blocks of other people's criticism. I did something else entirely. I took every single movie that Woody Allen did. So I remember this very well. It was December, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to watch everything that Woody did, even the movies that he just acted in, didn't direct, didn't write. I'm gonna have to look at everything that he's written. I'm gonna have to look at his interviews, books of interviews. I'm gonna have to get books about Woody Allen, books of criticism, and engage with all of that. And I read all of that. I've watched all of his movies at least 3 times each, and every single time that I would write, I would progressively take more and more notes, right? Or rather, every single time that I would watch something that he made, I would progressively take more and more notes. And I remember like the first few essays that I did on the movies, it was like really, it was a true slog. But by the time I found my groove, when it got to like the dramas or whatever, they were really coming out very well and quickly. And I only had 4 months to do everything. That's read everything, watch everything multiple times, engage with the criticism, and get this book out. And I remember very clearly, I was getting married that April, and I was like, I'm not going to be getting married at my anniversary is April 25th. I was like, I'm not going to be getting married at April 25th and then going to Korea, because I had a second wedding ceremony in Korea. I'm not going to go then have a second wedding ceremony in Korea thinking about finishing this book. I'm going to get it done. And from like the time that I would wake up, I would literally roll out of bed. First thing I would do, I would get on the computer and I would write. And I would stop only when it was nighttime. That's all I did for 4 months. And this thing that seemed so impossible, so such a crazy task, like almost 200,000 words, I did this thing in 4 months. It really is still to this day one of my proudest episodes, right? It let me know, right? It gave me, when I talked about like objective, frames of reference, it allowed me to understand that this is my objective frame of reference. Dan once told me something that stuck with me. He said, when you're good at something, it's very easy for you to compare yourself, not to yourself, but to other people. Like, the average professor would have to take a 2-year sabbatical to be able to even approximate a book like the one that I wrote about Woody Allen. And so it's very easy to therefore say, I'm going to take 2 years to do that, right? And do a better job. But I didn't have 2 years. I had 4 months and it still happened, right? So it really is one of my proudest moments, and it became an objective frame of reference. I can no longer say, well, look, I'm a slow reader, I'm a slow writer, I'm slow, like, I can, if I want, do this thing again, if I so feel like it. I'm going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. I literally have to wake up and do nothing else, right? I'm not in a position in my life to be able to do that, right? I have, I got to make money. I got to make these, YouTube videos. There's other things going on, but I know objectively that is a frame of reference. That is my objective frame of reference of what is possible, right? For me, my work ethic, for the future. And I don't have anyone to compare to other than myself, right? And if I do start comparing to other people, it only makes me feel better, right? Because I do know that most people would take years to do such a book. And having it done in 4 months is incredible. But you need to find out your own objective frames of reference, okay? You have to figure out what those are. You have to figure out what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, what you're able to do, what you can't do. And you have to, you just have, there is no excuse, right? You have to be able to do that, because if you can't do that, let's see. Ooh, okay. Realistically, a cat would hiss right now. I love the fact that there's no goddamn dialogue here. Maybe that's gonna change. Achievement unlocked, not alone. Guys, like, I have no kids, but I think of I thought of my students essentially as kids, and I realized early on that I could be a teacher, but I could do a lot more, right, and reach even more kids, reach more people, right, doing what I'm doing now. So I am, as I'm doing this video, I am thinking about you. I am thinking about everybody that is like me. There is somebody out there like me. There is somebody that the story that I just told, or the stories, right? There are people like that out there, right? And they are like me. And I'm trying to be cognizant of this fact. And I'm trying to be empathetic. And I'm trying to remember what it was like for me. The loneliness, the, am I ever going to do this? Am I ever going to do that? But the whole idea behind why I'm going to, even tell you anything, like, for example, about the Woody book is, like, don't start making assumptions about what you can and cannot do. You gotta test yourself. You gotta do it in a way that makes sense to you. So wait, I wasn't even paying attention where I'm supposed to go. Am I allowed to go up here? Oh, it's kind of like another invisible wall. Translate. What is that? Walled City International University, if not Science Tech Institute. So it's blocked out, the E. So I'm guessing maybe when whatever that little machine is, it's gonna allow me to interact in a more substantive way, I guess, with. Oh, here we go. Wait, is that? Wait, let's see what this is. There's something. All right, so I'm gonna be able to have some sort of, more advanced functions. I mean, if you play video games, you sort of know the deal, right? You're gonna have, expanding powers, right? That's fine, right? But I want to tell you guys that you got your own expanding powers. I think of you as my children. Not in a creepy way, right? I'm not a creep, but I'm a little bit creepy, I guess. People in my neighborhood, I stick out like a fucking sore thumb. Let me tell you, I'm like the only white person, first of all, in like a many block radius. First of all, I'm a weirdo. I want to walk around with my goddamn sun hat because I burn easily in the sun. Oh, here we go. I've embraced that, though. You think I'm ashamed? You think I'm gonna not wear my goddamn hat because I look weird? Ooh, look at that. This is also, I could tell the cat lovers did this, because if you put a harness on a cat, this is how they're gonna act. They're like, what the fuck? Like, what are you putting on me? What are you doing to me? Cats don't like that, right? Like, whenever I try to Cookie, since she's a street cat, I've been trying to get her in a harness. The first time that I did that, she just went completely, yeah, exactly, like that, low to the ground. Like, my God, what are you doing to me? You're restricting my movement, right? Because I mean, obviously, right, in a state of nature, anything that restricts your movement is extremely dangerous to them, and it's very, very dangerous to be a cat. I don't think people understand that. It's very dangerous to be a cat. Hell yeah, it's uncomfortable. Okay, so I got an inventory. I got keys. What else I got? Nothing else so far. Examine. What does it say? What I appreciate so far is there's been no like this little robot. There's no like melodramatic garbage, right? It's just like very matter of fact statements about, you know, the environment, right? So far, you know, the writing thus far is not a liability to the game. I guess the cat's already used to it. All right, so it's like, so remember, like I said, how in Chrono Trigger, like once you figure out how to unseal a door and you go back and you have to retrace your steps. So it's a similar kind of situation here. Remember all the stuff that you weren't able to do? Now you can do it. Use item. All right, so we got that. Let's see if there's anything else that was given to me as a... Here, translate. What does that mean? Yeah, very matter-of-fact writing that, you know, granted, like, you can't say, like, oh my god, like, it's such memorable, great writing. You can't do that. But you are able to, like, not be, like, broken, right? Like, the immersion in that regard, at least, is not broken. Obviously, the immersion is broken in the sense that, like, you're like, what is a cat doing reading English text? But, I mean, you know what I'm saying. Torchlight arrays. Ooh. This is, you know, this is very pretty. Look at that. It is very pretty, is it not? I'm not sure when it gets uploaded to YouTube, whether people could really appreciate it, but right now, you know, just kind of like how I'm... I'm gonna have to like get the code right. I can't just. I remember like when I was very young, there were games where it was a similar thing where you would have to sort of do the codes, and I remember like I don't know how old I was, but I was looking something up because there was still the internet at the time. There was some game, I forget the name of it, but there was like a code that you had to do, and I couldn't figure out what it was, or where I would figure out what, or how I could figure out what the code was. So I was trying to do like a math formula to figure out like, okay, if I just like input random things, how many possibilities are there? And it was like a totally crazy, like I learned, like literally I was terrible at math, but I learned math probabilities and how to calculate the probabilities of like all possible, say, combinations. It was like one of those, I forget the technical, you know, like that exclamation point. When you have like a 5 exclamation point, and that is like 5 times 4 times 3 times whatever, right? And depending on how, like whether or not you could reuse letters or words or whatever, numbers, you get different possibilities. But I did learn math for the sake of video games. Let's see, there must be something here. But anyway, guys, I am getting tired. It is 7:13. I'm supposed to have should have dinner now, and then go on a walk. If I'm in front of screens too late, and maybe you guys recognize this by yourself, and maybe you don't, right? Maybe this is new information to you. But if you're on screens and you're gaming way too close to your bedtime, I go to sleep at like 11. But before that, I usually have like an analog book in front of me, hour and a half before I go to bed. But if you have too much screen exposure, you're just going to be completely, you're not going to have a good sleep. Okay. So, all right. So like final bit of advice. I mean, if you got questions or whatever, feel free to leave a comment, you know, ask me things. I'm perfectly happy to answer questions, especially since if you look at some of these other videos, I got tons of troll comments, right? If you're a normal human being, right, I'll be likelier to respond to you. But again, if you're struggling right now, just try this. I mean, I mentioned Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. It's in the public domain. You don't even have to. I would, if you can, go to the library and pick that up as a book. You know, feel free. But it's in the public domain. You could get this on Gutenberg. You could get it elsewhere. You know, do some reading tonight. Do some serious reading and see how you feel if you force yourself at least 30 minutes, at least, right? And work up to an hour and 2 hours. But give yourself at least 30 minutes, finish a book. Maybe it'll take you a week, maybe it'll take you 2 weeks. See how you feel. See if you feel like this attention muscle is either reinvigorated, or maybe things from your youth that you haven't felt in a while, maybe they're coming back. Maybe that old curiosity, right, that you haven't felt in a long time, maybe that's returning. But I gotta get back to the real world, right? I have in a couple months, hopefully, I have a conversation with Norman Finkelstein for the channel and Artifact. He has a new book out on cancel culture, on political correctness, that sort of thing. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. Hopefully, we could do it. That's going to be for not just Patreon subscribers. It's going to be it's going to be public, obviously, right? But if you're subscribing, you're going to get extras every single month. So thank you for watching. If you can't subscribe, that's fine. You could just subscribe to the YouTube channel. You could hit like. You could help me strictly through the algorithms, right? I'm not demanding money from you, but if you can throw some money my way, it would be extremely helpful to turn this as my full-time job, right? I want to do this nonstop, this kind of thing. Give you important information. Next week or two, I'm going to upload a review as I'm walking around my neighborhood. Or rather, not my neighborhood, but a neighborhood in New York City. I'm going to upload a review of Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground. I have other things in the pipeline as well. There's a lot of stuff coming in the next 2 weeks alone. I have an artifact with Dan Schneider on Elon Musk. I have another artifact with him on abortion. And a lot of stuff happening, guys, right? So this is my dopamine. This is how I end up feeling good these days. So hopefully this has been useful to you. Again, if you're struggling, you know, leave a comment. I will do my best to answer. Thanks again. Hit like, hit subscribe. Again, automachination.com, alexsheremet.com, patreon.com/automachination. I will see you soon.